I heard you in a teaching session discussing with somebody creating space between thoughts and hopefully putting them on a better path for this work. But then you said this phrase, if I were a psychiatrist right now, I would be analyzing your ego and all of the unconscious stuff behind what you're saying, but that's a separate topic. Do the two not interact with one another? Why is that relegated to psychiatry work and
Well,
not this?
Dharma is far, far, far more advanced than psychiatry, and frankly, Western psychology. We've developed paradigms that are just kind of dead ends, largely, trying to create taxonomies that we've been doing for at least 2,500 years, and they're arbitrary. Is my point. So ask that in another way. That would be helpful.
So we're trying to get past the ego largely. With psychiatry work, you've said that if I were a psychiatrist,
I see. Okay. Oh, yeah, I know why it was an issue. Okay, so I'm no longer practicing psychiatry. Okay, so that's one thing. Second thing is that in psychiatry, what you do is you try and strengthen the ego. I mean, because if somebody's psychotic, you don't want them meditating or doing walking meditation or whatever, and weakening their ego. If somebody's fragmented identity or any number of other psychiatric disorders, then this work is contraindicated. Or if it's done, it has to be done by somebody specialized, somebody with enough knowledge of psychiatry and this stuff to make sure that people don't make themselves worse. So the foundational goals of psychiatry and Dharma are identical in one way and the opposite in another. And the way they're the same is that in both instances, the goal is to reduce suffering, right? In the former, though, the idea is to strengthen the I and to integrate it and to hold it together. And in the latter, it's to, you don't have to worry about, it's really interesting because one does not go to war with the ego. One does not fight thought with thought. One does not wash blood with blood, right? So if you start battling your ego in a direct way, what's going to happen is you'll just get more thought, more conflict in your mind, right? And that's not what you're looking for. So it's more like just putting it into a perspective and putting it into a proper space. So let's we can arbitrarily set the size of our mind. And one of the great things about the Flower Garland Sutra, or the Flower Ornament Sutra, or the Avatamsaka, is that it expands the mind, and then you realize that, hey, my mind is as big as this universe. It's bigger than this universe. And when you close your eyes, it might as well be. But it takes some time, some exercises, and some work, and some trial and error, and experimentation, and all the things that go along with a sincere inquiry. And you realize this space is huge. So now, the same thoughts that used to fill up this little mind that's this big, now those things are the size of little squiggles, and it just becomes relatively unimportant. And the personality, which is it's kind of automatic, and you don't have much control over it, which you're born with, your temperament, the details of the circumstances of your upbringing, etc. You end up with a temperament and a personality and a character structure, this and that, and so on and so forth. None of it matters. It's all going right into the ground with the fertilizer and the seed and the roots of the plants that are going to grow. So none of that stuff is of any consequence. And when you realize that, yeah, you need the ego in a certain way, I suppose. You don't need nearly as much as one does not need nearly as much as one thinks. There's a lot of carryover from habit and from the ambient culture. If you notice, some cultures are extremely arrogant and some are extremely humble, and everything in between. So all these things come together, but they don't amount to much. And that's where the insight comes in. When you realize that the ego is empty, that the human is empty, that this world is empty, at first that sounds strange, and it goes, well, that's weird. That doesn't make any sense. And it doesn't make any sense because people don't understand what emptiness is. But with a deep enough understanding of emptiness, then that leads to insight, and immediately it's like gratitude. These things come as an effect, not as causes so much. But everybody gets caught up in the ego thing, and the reason they do is because it's right there in the way most of the time, and the ego does not want you to succeed. The ego wants you to stay, it wants to stay in charge. And for many psychiatric cases, that's very important. That's very important, and that's good work, helping people integrate their egos. So does that answer more or less, or do you want to keep going?
Yeah, it does. But then I have a follow-up.
Okay.
What does psychiatry these days, and people can kind of get this somewhat, but what does psychiatry attempt to treat these days, and what is it actually good for? What subset of things is it?
Well, are you going to include psychoanalysis within psychiatry?
Modern Western practice of psychiatry.
Okay. So practice of psychiatry is so different on the Upper East Side of New York than on the South Side of Chicago that any generalization is pretty much meaningless. So oh yeah,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, psychoanalysis is like, if you can afford it in New York and LA, it's like almost de rigueur. What thinking person doesn't have a consultant for their mind, right, or their emotions, or and plus they've got high incidences of neuroses, right? So it's very common in the large cities and among wealthy people. And then there's people who get, the largest, not long ago, I hope it's not the same. I was looking at a talk that I did, which, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago. And I was looking at the rates of incarcerations of children and all that other stuff. And at that time, the LA County Jail was the largest psychiatric facility in the world. And how I ended up in juvenile justice was I was, practicing child psychiatry, and I noticed, well, where are all the kids? I knew I knew where the white kids were, the middle class kids, but where are the other kids? And they were in prison, right? And so, in juvie. And so that's why that was the impetus or the instigation of the whole juvenile court system program that we set up in California and then spread across the country. And so we're going to need things like that in the future. And so some of these YouTubes, they're only slightly dated. But what's interesting is that the tech and the AIs have improved more, and you can see that in these, because I was saying a computer can't recognize facial expression. Well, that's not true anymore, right? So it's kind of interesting in that way. But the crux of it, these are to judges, these are to the board of supervisors, this is to lawyers, probation officers, and social workers and administrators in these fields, and they're still germane. And so I know I've gotten off topic a bit, but I do want to put a plug in for that.